Hi all, this is a return to a system I last benchmarked in 2021, I think. It's a HP Pavilion A1009 system from early 2000s. Now I've applied a couple of major upgrades to this system. The first being to the CPU, which is now an Intel Pentium 4, which is from the codename series called Prescott, and it runs at 3 GHz. You have to be careful though if you do decide to upgrade the CPU, and make sure that the chipset on the motherboard accepts the CPU. The chipset on this motherboard is i845GE. Now you can find that out by running the freeware program CPU-Z. So you just need to be careful there. Even though the CPU is in the correct socket, I did find one refused to boot, but this one's up and running now. Now the graphics card is an Nvidia 7600GS with 512 meg of DDR2 VRAM. Now that's in the AGB slot. This system actually has PCI Series 1 slots, but they aren't as fast as the AGP slot. Doesn't have any PCIe slots, so that card is in the AGB slot. So what I'll do is I'll start up this system and run a few benchmarks on games just to see how it performs. Now that graphics card is actually passively cooled. There's no fan on it. And I did notice that it was running pretty hot. So what I did is I added a small fan that blows air across it from the front of the case. I mean, there's no intake vents on this system, but it's better than nothing. So let's start up the benchmarks and I'll talk through the results. So as with the first video that I did on this system, I'm going to be running a couple of relatively early benchmarks, 3D Mark 2001, 2003, just to give the system a chance. Probably could run the benchmarks after this, but these are the ones that I've loaded up. So I'll let this run and then report back with the score. So the first one is 2001. Right, so I ran that and the score at the end was 13904, which is a decent upshift from the previous video. So I'll run 3D Mark 2003 now and report back. So after running 3D Mark 03, the final score is 8477, again a considerable upshift from the last video. So what I'll do now is run through a few games. Now what I'll do, the games I'll run is the ones that struggled or failed to start in the first video, just to see what sort of performance increase we get. Up first is Bioshock. Now again, to give this system a chance, I'm recording this on external camera, so what I can see and what's actually showing are slightly different. So there's a degradation in quality what's on the recorded video compared to what I can see, and I've got the Bandicam frame rate counter in the top left. So last time we weren't even touching 20, so at the moment in this scene we're getting on average, I'd say late 20s, early 30s, so that's more than playable. There are some action scenes in this game, but it's mostly about exploration. Now looking around, I could be wrong, but those textures don't look quite right, so maybe that needs looking at. If you want to play this game, just be aware that some of those textures look a bit strange. I'm not sure if it's deliberate or not with the style of game this is, but it's I'd say it's more than playable. I mean, there's no characters at the moment, but I'd say it's more than playable looking at it compared to last time. Right, so that's Bioshock. Up next is Borderlands. Now, if I remember rightly, the problem with this game is that a lot of the textures refuse to load incorrectly. So at the moment, with a few characters, we're getting early 20s, mid 20s. I mean, it looks all right. Looks all right to me, even if that frame rate says it's not that great. So I suppose with this sort of game, like with all of them really, just put them on the lowest settings you can go to in the main start menu, and just work your way up and just see if you can get more out of it. So that's Borderlands. Up next is Call of Duty 4. So in the first video I did, we're not even getting 20 frames per second, so with a few characters on the screen it's getting over mid 20s, occasionally dips, which is expected once there's a firefight going on, but yeah, it seems to be a lot more playable now anyway, and again, in a game series like this you can be sure it's going to play the first few games prior to this game's release, so I'll try and get a few more, bit of a firefight going. So yeah, it's mid 20s. I mean, it gets above 20 more than last time anyway, even hitting mid 30s. So even though that frame rate's a bit erratic depending on what's going on, I'd say this is at the moment it's very playable compared to last time. So that's Call of Duty 4. On to Crysis. Now the previous video, Crysis wasn't even getting double figures and keeping the same settings, which is lowest resolution and all the graphical quality settings set to low. At the moment we're getting early 20s, nudging mid 20s. So what I'll do is I'll get a firefight going just to see how it performs with more characters moving on screen. Yeah, as expected, it does dip. I mean, at the moment it seems to be playable, but yeah, it's really struggling at the moment. Mid 20s, so I suppose you could say at the moment it's playable, but I'm sure later on with lots of characters or vehicles moving on the screen, that frame rate's going to tank quite a lot. But try it and see. It's a lot better than last time anyway. We are getting over double figures anyway. Right, so that's Crysis. Fear 2 up next. Now this is one of the games where the frame rate was just making this unplayable, but at the moment going into an outside area with a few characters moving on the screen. I mean, it's mid to high 20s at the moment, nudging above 30, which on a system and game like this is pretty decent, I'd say. Sometimes goes down to early 20s, but again it's a vast improvement on the earlier video where this game was completely unplayable. So that's Fear 2. Up next is Far Cry 2. Now this was completely unplayable with the unupgraded system. So at the moment with a few characters, it's early 20s. I mean, there's not too much firefights going on, but I think with a few effects in this system, then that frame rate's going to go down. But at the moment it's playable. I mean, if you can live with early 20s, sometimes late teens on frame rate, then go for it. Okay, so that's Far Cry 2. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is the next game. Now we were barely getting on average 15 frames per second in the unupgraded system, and in this very first opening level where not much is going on, we're getting mid 20s, which looks alright to me. May or may not go down if there's a few more characters go on the screen or action, but at the moment it's a lot more playable than last time. So feel free to try that out. I don't think it'll play Grand Theft Auto 4, but you can give it a try. But if this is not even hitting 30, then I'm pretty sure that game won't be playable. Right, so that's Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. And this is Wolfenstein from 2009, where in this scene there's a lot of characters moving around and it's not really playable. It's not even hitting 15 frames per second, so give it a try, but me personally, I couldn't live with that low frame rate. So that's Wolfenstein from 2009. This is Tomb Raider Legends. Now this was playable last time, but there's been a considerable upshift in frame rates, so it does give you a bit of headroom if you really want to change the quality of this game. I mean, it seems alright to me, but feel free to experiment, but we're getting a decent upshift. I mean, it's even nudging 60 frames per second, which is the maximum on this size monitor anyway. It still won't play Tomb Raider Underworld at decent frame rates. It's just too much for this system. But Legend, it's almost maxing out on that frame rate. Okay, so that's Tomb Raider Legend. To sum up then on this HP Pavilion system, I upgraded the CPU to Pentium 4, which is in the code series of Prescott, running at 3 GHz, and I upgraded the graphics card to an Nvidia 7600GS, which goes into the AGB slot. That's got 512 of DDR2 VRAM, and ran a few benchmarks and games, and there's been a considerable upshift in the results of the graphical benchmarks and also the games. Now the system still won't run Tomb Raider Underworld and Mafia 2 at playable frame rates, and the same with Wolfenstein from 2009, but the other games are more than playable, and Borderlands, the texture issue's been sorted out now. Rage still fails to start, which is not surprising. So if you've got any queries on this system, just drop me a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe, and thanks again for watching.